Hey, if you all could find a seat, that would be great, and we'll get started right on time. Thanks. What? Okay. Okay, thanks, Colton. Well, welcome to Gambit's first political forum. I hope it's not going to be our last, and thanks for coming down to the Advocates' great event space. It's too nice for journalists. It really is, as you can see. So it's available for rent if you want to rent it for a Mardi Gras party or whatever, but yeah, this is here for the community to enjoy. I wanted to thank the Advocate for helping us with this. I also wanted to thank our prime sponsor, AARP, of which I've been a member for a while. And I wanted to draw your attention to a flyer on the chairs there. Tomorrow in this space, we're having a benefit for the Times-Picayune /NOLA.com / the New Orleans Advocate Doll and Toy Fund, which, if you're from New Orleans, you know what wonderful work they've done for more than a century, providing toys and gifts for kids that otherwise would not have them during the holidays. It's only $15, and we've got food and drink, and we hope you'll come down and support that. So, without further ado, let me introduce our panelists, both of whom I'm sure you know. First is Stephanie Grace, who is on the editorial board of the New Orleans Advocate / NOLA.com, and is a columnist in the paper, and went to school with Bobby Jindal. Yes.
Is this on yet?
Yes.
I did not go to school with Bobby Jindal because, sadly, I am older than Bobby Jindal, so he followed me.
And next up is Gambit's political editor and a commentator on WWL-TV, and one of the best fishermen in the city, I can say. It's Clancy DuBos.
And I'm older than both of them.
So I assume everybody in this room is pretty savvy with politics, so we're not getting into a lot of details on the nuts and bolts of what's going on here. But we're going to start with the governor's race. And in the last hour, President Trump tweeted his support for both Eddie Rispone and Ralph Abraham. And we'll see what effect that has on the race. But I wanted to put you both on the spot to start. Is Governor Edwards, who's very close to 50% right now in most polling, is he going to win on the first ballot, or are we going to have a runoff?
I have been in the I think he's going to make it camp for quite a while. And that's, first of all, let me say this about Trump's tweet. We know that he didn't write it because everything is spelled correctly, including Rispone, which is hard.
Subject-verb agreement.
Yeah, really.
Good punctuation.
No hyphens, apostrophes, all good. And despite the fact that the president in this tweet called John Bel Edwards a Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi Democrat, I don't think people in Louisiana think that. I mean, I think there are some people in Louisiana who think that, but they're not in play anyway. There are people who love Donald Trump. There are people who want to vote for a Republican. There are people who believe he was an aberration. His election was kind of a mistake, and this will be a correction because it's a Republican state and we tend to vote for Republicans. We tend to vote for Republicans in national races, for president, for Senate, which basically in recent years have become almost stand-ins for presidential races. You're voting for one side or the other. Remember David Vitter, before he lost spectacularly in 2015, he won pretty spectacularly in 2010, and that was after his prostitution scandal. What did he do? He didn't run against Charlie Melanson, he ran against Barack Obama. And that was the strategy, and it worked. Mary Landrieu didn't have a chance running against Bill Cassidy in 2014 because by then this pattern was really set that it was a referendum on the national parties, and Mary Landrieu could distance herself as much as she wanted to from the National Democrats. She was still going to have that tag on her. John Bel Edwards has done a really good job of distancing himself, and I think that is something you can do as a governor much more easily. And again, you look around the country, there's kind of a pattern here. there's a company called Morning Consult, which does national polls every couple of months, and they put out a press release and they say, they rank the governors in terms of popularity in every state. And things have been pretty consistent for the last few years. I've been getting them. The two most popular governors in the country are Charlie Baker of Massachusetts and Larry Hogan of Maryland. Who are they? They are Republicans in Democratic states. A couple of years ago, you would look down to the bottom of the list and you would see one familiar name, Bobby Jindal of Louisiana, who was often the second least popular governor, again, even though he was a Republican in a Republican state and had once been very popular. The least popular was a guy named Sam Brownback from Kansas, who was someone who very much like Jindal was doing very kind of Republican things in a Republican state, was really running an austerity budget, was really putting the, cut taxes, cut spending, and that will create growth theory into practice. And it wasn't working, and people were really mad, like they were here. So I think John Bel Edwards is kind of in a sweet spot. He's, put the budget is back in good shape after several years. People wanted that, I think, across the board. There are a lot of Republicans who want their top scholarships for their kids. And he's muted some of the criticism. He's been very upfront about saying, I think I need to be anti-abortion and pro-gun in this state. And he's really stuck to that. I know to the frustration of a lot of pro-choice voters, but he really has. And, I think he's going to end up being, kind of another case that will prove that governors are different right now, even in this very polarized time in this country. And I may be wrong, but we'll see.
And I know Clancy hates to prognosticate, but I'm going to put him on the spot here.
I agree with Stephanie. Yeah. I'll add just a few things and in agreement. First, let me thank again AARP. It is so nice to have a sponsor like that has a statewide perspective, actually a national perspective, but it's AARP of Louisiana. And Bobby Savoy, thank you. I can't see with all these lights, but I saw him earlier and we got our picture taken, and it's really wonderful that AARP is doing this, and we really appreciate it. And I've been a member of AARP longer than anybody else up here, I'm pretty sure. But a couple of things. First, historically, Louisiana voters separate, and this is building on what Stephanie already said. Our voters vote for US senators and congressmen based upon national issues. They look at it through a national prism, in the same way they vote for president. Okay, national issues matter. And she mentioned, and I was going to do this, but I'm building on again what Stephanie said about Vitter. The prostitution scandal broke in 2007. He next ran for re-election in 2010. He won overwhelmingly. Charlie Melanson is a nice guy, but he ran a terrible campaign. Vitter ran a really strong campaign on the issues that he's good at, which is all these national issues. They ran against Barack Obama. It was immigration, all these national issues. Never mentioned Charlie Melanson. He won, like almost 60-40 or something, 58%, something like 58% is kind of the sweet spot for Republicans in Louisiana on national issues. It's what Trump got, it's what McCain got, it's what they all get, right around high 50s, almost 60%. So Vitter got that in 2010. I think at that point, he turned his sights toward governor, and he managed the campaign of Bill Cassidy against Mary Landrieu. And basically, it was at the time, I referred to it as the Spanish Civil War, which was a run-up to World War II. It was sort of the preseason. Well, that election, Cassidy versus Landrieu, was Vitter's preseason to run for governor. And Vitter is I'm not a big fan of his, but he is a brilliant strategist politically. He really is. And I don't use that word very often, but he is strategically brilliant at politics. But very few politicians can be brilliant or even intelligent about their own, managing their own campaigns. Well, Vitter ran this national campaign against Mary Landrieu with all the national issues, and what did we all learn from that campaign? Mary Landrieu votes with Barack Obama 97% of the time. And I remember saying at the time, somewhere there's a class of fourth graders that if you could get them together 20 years down the road and say, what do you remember about Mary Landrieu? They would all say, oh, she voted with Barack Obama 97% of the time. Because when you can articulate a message that a fourth grader can remember and put together, that's a good message politically. Brilliant campaign. So that was in 2014. So a year later, right after, in fact, Cassidy got reelected, Vitter announced he's running for governor. And he ran a national campaign for governor. That had never been done before successfully. And I don't know very many folks who even tried to do it, but he tried to do it. It did not work. All of a sudden, the prostitution scandal mattered because voters in Louisiana look at governors and mayors and state lawmakers through a different paradigm. They look at it as somebody you're going to see. When you vote for a U.S. senator, that's somebody that goes off 1,300 miles away. We don't see that guy or that lady again, very rarely. But a governor is somebody you might actually bump into, certainly a mayor or a council member or a state lawmaker. These are people who are here at home. So we look at them totally differently. Now, some people, as Stephanie said, are always going to vote for a D or always going to vote for an R. But the swing voters, the voters who actually decide who wins, they look at it, who is this person on a local race? And we continue to look at governor's races as local races. John Bell Edwards knew that 4 years ago. I think he knows it this time. He has run based upon his record in Louisiana. And I can't tell you how many Republicans I've bumped into, some of them office holders, who have told me privately, I can't find anything really to criticize the guy for, and I'm probably going to vote for him. And they would never say that out loud, but I'm hearing that from a lot of them. That tells me he can win. I don't like to make predictions, but based upon the most recent polls, I think he's right there, like 52%. But you know what? There are so many things that could go right or wrong. Candidates always try to control what they can control, their message, their appearances, the TV and all that. There are so many things that they cannot control, and that's where luck, good or bad, comes in. John Bell Edwards has run a superb campaign. He's had a message, he has stuck to it. He's also gotten lucky. The Republicans have done him every favor they could possibly do, including endorsing both Risponi and Abraham. I wrote a column about a month ago. I said, they're like Tweedledee and Tweedledum. I got a bunch of phone calls off that, most of them from Republicans saying, you're right. And I wasn't trying to pick on it, but the column was inspired by an event like this. I was speaking to a Rotary Club, and a gentleman in the club said, can you tell me the difference between those two guys? And this is a Metairie, okay, a conservative business guy. He couldn't tell the difference. And which is why we love things like this, because we learn more from you than you learn from us. We learn from your questions. Kevin, do you want to talk about that? I hope I've answered that question. But tell them how they can text in and make this interactive.
Sure. A little bit later in the program, we're going to be using Twitter, because all politics is Twitter and all Twitter is politics these days. So if you have a question, use the hashtag Gambit Forum, and I'll take a look at that in about 15, 20 minutes, and we'll start asking Clancy and Stephanie some of your questions. But right now, I wanted to ask you, can you analyze the ads in this race? It seems like Abraham and Risponi are kind of giving the very same message in many of their ads. John Bell Edwards is hitting the themes of expanding Medicaid. And just kind of break down for me what you think, what effective ads there have been, which ineffective ads there have been, and if they're moving the needle at all.
If I had to pick the most effective, I think I would go with a criminal justice ad that John Bell Edwards has put out that is defending the criminal justice package that he supported with the support of a lot of Republicans and a lot of law enforcement people. And it's interesting because that's an easy issue. That's a scary issue for politicians, because I think probably AARP, people eligible for AARP will remember Willie Horton and how easy it is. You can have great intentions, you could have all kinds of good outcomes with people who, you give a second chance to through some of these reform policies, but it takes one real horror story to turn into an attack ad. And nevertheless, John Bell Edwards supported policies aimed at reducing Louisiana's nation-leading incarceration rate, which is now not nation-leading. It's now second place, so that's a little bit of an improvement, but it's something. It's moving in the right direction. And he did it, and this is kind of part of a national movement, and it's really interesting because it's even, again, in these incredibly polarized times, this is an issue where Republicans and Democrats are really coming together, and you have social justice people, and you have fiscal conservatives, libertarians, religious conservatives. You have all different groups that are the Koch brothers that are coming together. Donald Trump, who has lauded this Louisiana package, as John Bel Edwards will be very happy to tell you. But it's still something that his opponents have attacked because, again, it's easy to run an ad, and who's run the ad? The dangerous criminals ad. That was Risponi, I think.
I think it was Risponi.
The governor is letting dangerous criminals out on the street. Now, David Vitter talked about how he had an ad 4 years ago where he said John Bel Edwards would let dangerous criminals out.
And there were 10,000 Syrians on the way to Louisiana.
Yeah.
Remember that at the last?
Yeah.
Again, trying to nationalize the race.
It. But what happened, the interesting thing with Vitter was when he lost and he became a lobbyist, he ended up lobbying for this package that he had run the ad against. So what John Bel Edwards has done, and he had this in the can as soon as he was attacked for it, he let it rip, and it's law enforcement officers from across the state, Democrats, Republicans, Paul Connick from Jefferson Parish, sheriffs and DAs, basically saying he's not making the state more dangerous, he's making it safer, we're saving money, this is a good thing, law enforcement supports it. He's a fourth generation law enforcement, family. I mean, just absolutely his message, and I think it's really strong. To me, one of the most noteworthy ads has been Eddie Risponi again. A couple weeks ago, he let her rip with an ad attacking Ralph Abraham, the other Republican. And again, this is the system we have. We have this crazy system where when one candidate could possibly win in the primary, we end up having the general election and the primary at the same time. So John Bel Edwards doesn't have a Democratic opponent. He's running a general election. These two Republicans are running a primary against each other, the same as the Democrats are doing now in Iowa and New Hampshire. And so they need to kind of knock each other down, but at the same time, if you knock somebody off of your Republican opponent, that person might not come to you. It might go to the Democrat, or it might stay home. So it was a really controversial thing. Some Republicans were very, very angry at him for fighting within the family. This happened 3 years ago with David Vitter and Scott Angel and Jay Darden, and it's one of the reasons Republicans think they kind of lost momentum. They lost their way because they all turned on each other while, again, John Bel Edwards floated above it all.
Started acting like Democrats acted 30, 40 years ago.
And it really depends just on the numbers. If you have you could have one Republican and 3 Democrats, and the dynamic would be opposite. So it's not a, Republican or Democrat thing.
It's about who's got the most candidates in there.
Yeah. So one of the things I found very interesting was that, again, Eddie Risponi got a lot of criticism. Abraham was hoping he would get a wave of Republican endorsements out of it. He got a couple, not tons. He got Moon Griffon, the very influential talk show host. He got Clay Higgins, the congressman. He did not get the rest of the congressional delegation. They're all still neutral. But one thing I thought was very interesting this weekend was I was watching the Saints game, and there was that ad, which means to me that Eddie Risponi is not listening. He's not saying, okay, I'll back off. He's doubling down on that strategy because he paid a lot of money to run that ad in where he knew a lot of people would see it. So
I agree. I think Risponi's attack, actually, most of the attacks, I think, have been pretty good, especially the more recent one. It's an attack by Gumbo Pack, which last year put out some of the best ads. And once again, they put out the one attacking Risponi, where they're mimicking his ad, parodying one of his first positive ads. Well, his very first ad was basically Trump, 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 I love Trump. And then he had one talking about, he was sitting there with the bow, which, I'm a bow hunter. And I was like, all right, pull it all the way back, Eddie. But anyway.
I didn't pick up on that.
He's got his camo on, which certainly looked better than David Vitter in camo. I believe Eddie Risponi actually wears camo.
Or Bobby Jindal, who also.
Or Bobby Jindal, yeah. They look like they just got their camo back from the dry cleaners.
John Bel Edwards can carry it off. That's another thing about him.
But anyway, he had the one with the bow and the football, where he doesn't throw the football, which is interesting because, if you're going to take a football and go like this, you're supposed to throw it. Well, it's a real crafty edit. It's like, maybe he can't really throw that football very well. I don't know. And then there was something else, the Trump sticker. And so Gumbo Pack did this ad, which has been running a lot in the last few days, where they got 3 different people. They got a guy an older guy, older than him, with the crossbow saying, look, I'm a hunter, and I don't believe anything that guy said about, sitting about Trump. And then there's a woman saying, she was taking him on, I forget what it was, and then it was a guy who looks like a football player holding a football like it belongs in his hand, saying, I don't want to, and they're all calling him a phony. It's phony, phony.
Yeah.
And that was a very good ad. One of the worst ads, and I'm going to use a quote from somebody else, about 5 weeks ago, Abraham came out with an ad that only ran for about a week. It was called, That's the Truth. I'm Ralph Abraham, and I'm a doctor. There's only two genders, and I believe in God, and I believe this, and that's the truth. But when he delivered the ad, the lighting must have been like this, because Abraham's eyes were kind of half open, and I was at this political event, and everybody was talking about it, and the most biting comment I heard on that, and I can say this, I guess, on live Facebook, but not on TV, James Carville said, I could fart a better ad than that, which I thought was one of the greatest comments I've ever heard. Whether it's true or not, I thought it was typical Carville,
Yeah.
But it really was kind of a weak ad because you haven't seen it since then. Whereas Risponi brought back that attack ad on Abraham. And you mentioned something, Stephanie, that I think is worthy of repeating because it's not just about reacting. The fact that we have a sitting congressman running for governor and half of the Republican delegation, or more than half, are not endorsing. What does that say? What it says is Eddie Risponi has a boatload of money and they're all scared of him, I think. Because this is a guy, he's never run for anything before, but he's put $11.5 million of his own dollars into the race. That gets people's attention.
Let me add one thing to that.
He's certainly been a major donor to other Republican candidates
Yes. Oh, yeah.
in the past. So when he says he's an outsider, I'm not quite sure, because his money has not been outside.
He has been, financially, he's been an insider.
And again, as John Bell Edwards has pointed out, he was a big Jindal donor. Let me just add, do people know Gumbo PAC is an independent PAC that has supported John Bell Edwards this time and also did some of the really memorable ads last time. And let me mention one more.
And they won some national awards for their ads.
They did. They're good.
The really good consultants would rather win elections than national awards. But if you can do both, that's all right.
Yes. And let me add one more thing about the throwing the football. You know who can throw a football? John Bell Edwards, because he was, a student athlete.
Played quarterback.
And there is video. There's an ad from a national pro-democratic PAC that shows him tossing the football around with, Drew Brees. So, hey.
Let's imagine a hypothetical runoff.
Actually, right now, John Bell could probably throw a ball better than Drew Brees.
Exactly. Yes. Put him in, coach. Yes.
And no Teddy Bridgewater jokes either.
That's going to change.
Okay, let's imagine a hypothetical runoff with either one of those candidates and John Bell Edwards. What would that look like? Would that get really ugly? Would President Trump come down?
It would get really ugly, and it would be Trump from the Republican side. Okay. He'd probably come down here, have a couple of rallies, or at least one. Not in Orleans Parish, but he would have a rally somewhere in Louisiana. Probably, look, I've never been a consultant, but I could imagine some consultant telling him, do your rally in Lafayette, because the Cajun vote is typically the swing vote, or Baton Rouge.
I think it's a whole new ballgame if that happens,
yes.
Because then, and this is why, I read something in, I think, Politico today, and I know this is online, but they mostly got everything right. But sometimes you read these national stories and they kind of get a little nuance wrong. And one of the lines, and I think it was Politico, was, lately the Edwards people have started to think they could win in the primary. They've thought that all along. They've been going for it all along. That's the plan, because that's where he has the strongest advantage. If he gets into a runoff, then think about it. Then he is an incumbent who has gotten less than 50% of the vote. And blood in the water, he doesn't look strong anymore. He looks weak. He looks vulnerable, and that's a very different dynamic. Another thing, but on the other hand, and again, Trump could come in. We don't know what's going to happen with Trump. I mean, I think we have to say that now that we're in this kind of chaotic national situation. The candidates, certainly Ralph Abraham and Eddie Risponi, have not at all backed off of supporting him, nor have most of the Louisiana Republicans. But this is moving really fast, this situation. So I don't know. I think there's a lot that's unpredictable right now.
And let me say one thing. Stephanie's absolutely right. The Edwards people always thought they could and should try to win it. And when you think about it, Edwards has, again, part of this is luck and part of it is skill. He's got one thing on his to-do list, John Bell Edwards. That's get a majority of the vote. The Republicans have two things. They have to keep him below 50%, and then each of them has to get past the other.
Yeah.
So they've got not only twice as many things, but it's geometrically more difficult for either Risponi or Abraham at this point to win. Job one for them, which they started off agreeing on, is let's just keep this guy below 50%. Well, that was great for Abraham. He had twice as much support as Risponi. I have seen no polls since that attack by Risponi on Abraham, so I don't know where they are. The fact that Abraham has had to answer, I think maybe they've pulled up kind of even. But the question is, are they just trading, you know, the last poll that I saw that I put a lot of stock in is today, almost, well, 4 weeks old. It started on September 3rd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th by Bernie Pincinat. So it's 3.5 weeks old. But his polls are generally pretty good. And in that poll, in the raw numbers, Edwards had 47%. And I agree, he definitely wants to win it outright. But if he gets 49.5%, in some ways, it's not as bad, obviously not as bad as if he only gets 44%. And the rule of thumb is if an incumbent gets less than 45%, he or she is toast. And everything above that makes it easier. The problem is, it's not going to be as most of the races on the ballot are going to be settled on October 12th. So the governor's race is always the main event, but it's going to require Edwards to go raise a bunch of more money, and the TV stations and all the people who feed, and newspapers who feed off advertising are going to love it. But he is certainly trying. But with Edwards at 47%, Risponi and Abraham together were at 40%. So he's had a majority of the decided vote. It's a question of turnout. And I went back to luck. You can do everything right in a political campaign. If you don't have some luck, you still might not win. Bad weather, bad economic news, some kind of horrible crime that, who knows? Lots of things could go wrong that are totally beyond the control of anybody on the ballot.
I mean, this
that could
Bayou
have an
Steel
effect.
announcement yesterday.
Yeah, the Bayou Steel
How's that
announcement.
going to,
So we're getting some good questions from the audience. And I want to assure you we're going to get to the legislature and to Jefferson Parish, which looks like it's going to be very dramatic, even though Mike Yenny isn't running again. It's still going to be dramatic. But there's one last question, and we've got this from Tim Morris. He wants to know if Governor Edwards, should he be reelected, would be able to get anything done if Republicans win a supermajority in the legislature.
I think he will, because they will have a supermajority of people with an R behind their name, but there are trial lawyers who are Republicans in the legislature. There are people who are moderate Republicans. The Senate has always been, and I think will still be, to a lesser extent, but to some extent it will still be the governor's playground, because there will be people up there who are moderates who, to me, the best job in Louisiana politics, unless you want to be governor or senator or president, the best job in politics is a state senator. You just got to be one of 20, and you're a prince. You get whatever you want from the governor. And they know that better than anybody.
Okay.
it's interesting. I almost feel like electorally, it's probably played a little bit to Edwards' advantage to have a Republican majority legislature now, and that's for a couple reasons. One is that back to the ads, I mean, a word that you were hearing in so many of these ads is bipartisan, right? And think about it. There's nothing he can do that's not going to be bipartisan because he's got a Republican legislature. So, he hasn't, first of all, he's pretty moderate. He's not someone who has the Bernie Sanders agenda or wants to, do Medicare for all or anything like that. He doesn't want to, his gun control. He does favor enhancing background checks a little bit, at gun shows, but he's not a gun rights guy. But he would like to raise the minimum wage a little bit, which is actually very popular in the state. Doesn't matter, the legislature's not going to let him do it. So basically, his record is a bipartisan record. It has to be, including the tax increases, as much as they try to act as if they're not. So that's going to be the same going forward. And there is a real battle between the conservative ideological Republicans and the moderate Republicans, and there has been you know, in
Some
the
of them
past
are
couple
getting
years.
primaried,
They
yeah.
are. They're getting primaried from the right. There's a group that David Vitter used to run that's now controlled by Jeff Landry and John Kennedy. It used to be called the Committee for a Republican Majority, back when there was not a Republican majority in the legislature. Now it's called the Committee for a Conservative Majority. Because you have they got the Republican majority and they didn't get what they wanted because there are a bunch of moderates in there. But on the other hand, there are some structural reasons, you know, things that support moderation, and that is the power, you know, one of them is the power of the governor, as Clancy said. Another kind of variable here is that the Senate, I think, is going to be much more Republican, much more conservative than it has been in the past, just because, you know, term limits is hitting a lot of those old school senators, John Alario being the biggest of them. John Alario, was a Democrat, became a Republican, but has been a very close ally of every governor because that's his philosophy. You know, he was Bobby Jindal's guy, now he's John Bel Edwards' guy. John Bel Edwards probably isn't going to have a guy in charge of the Senate next time, at least to this extent. So that'll be different.
Not to the extent that Alario was, but there's a real race. There are races, hot races behind the scenes to be the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. And there's a handful of candidates in both chambers that want it. And Edwards, I think, certainly has a favorite in the Senate. I don't know who he would back in the House, just somebody moderate. But depending on who wins those races, again, whoever wins in the Senate won't be John Alario, but depending on whether it's Rick Ward or somebody else. You know.
But they might not be, you know, Cameron Henry or a Cameron
Right.
Henry type.
In this week's paper, Clancy, you wrote that the Jefferson Parish president's race is likely to get really ugly. And there's two very well-known candidates in the race, Cynthia Lee Shang, John Young. Can you kind of explain to me why you think it's going to get dirty?
Well, because it's close and both candidates want it. And that's just, and look at who's running their campaigns. And, you know, you got Dino Cedar with Cynthia Lee Shang, who's the master counterpuncher, and Bill Allerton, who's one of the, you know, all-time attack dogs in this business, running John Young's campaign. And Young's fired the first shot when, I think a day or two after Cynthia Lee Shang announced she was running, called her Cyanide Cynthia. The gloves came off very early.
Wow.
And
He put it on an attack.
Lee Shang has been ahead in most of the
Yeah.
polls, so I'm looking for more attacks from John Young in the closing
John
days.
Young actually put out an attack during Cynthia Lee Shang's
Yeah.
announcement.
Yes.
Because I was there and everybody was reading it on the phone. And it was, I will tell you, I don't know if you've seen there, we have a few flyers next door. It's getting there. It's happened.
Yeah.
That the attacks are flying. There are super PACs on each side. John Young is getting attacked for how he handled a sexual harassment situation when he was, not him, but an employee, when he was parish president. They're attacking Cynthia for a deal basically just to create a self-contained emergency room. And we even saw one that is interesting because it was probably going to black voters because that's how these things work. But they're both Republicans, we should say, and Jefferson Parish tends to be pretty Republican. But this is John Young endorsed Donald Trump, and it's a negative mailer. So it's going to, can we trust him? He endorsed Donald Trump. So, it's people going for subgroups, and you get really, when these races get dirty, you get these really targeted mailers. What I would get is going to be different from what you would get because I'm female and you're male. So, and then, certainly by race, and then by, neighborhood, they kind of look at the, how your neighborhood votes, and occasionally you get kind of a weird one where, they think you're both like very liberal and very conservative. And I know a political consultant who's in one of those places, and he loves like posting the mailers he gets, and it seems, it's kind of targeting fail. But in general, the targeting is very precise right now. And that is happening in that race.
And it's going to get ugly because there's a lot at stake.
Yeah.
And they have very different styles. Neither one of them is Darth Vader. But Cynthia Lee Shang is definitely someone who gets along with the council and would have a much better working relationship with the council. If John Young gets in, it's going to be an ugly 4 years in terms of council relations with the executive branch, because they just don't like him, and he doesn't like them. He's always, and so how David Vitter was always, I'm the only honest guy in town. That's John Young, and maybe he's telling the truth. I don't know, but I don't believe that everybody on the council is a crook. So, but that's the way he portrays it, and a lot of voters find that appealing. So.
Okay. And they did about Vitter back in the day too.
What about the council races in Jefferson?
Well, you've got 5 district council members, one of whom is already reelected, Dominic Impostata in District 4, which is sort of the Kenner West Metairie district. I'm going to go in reverse order. And District 5 is the Bucktown, Old Metairie, Metairie proper, Lakeside area, Fat City. That's Jennifer Van Vranken, the incumbent. She ran a really strong race 4 years ago and got elected. I think she's the favorite to get reelected, but Amy French is running against her and is spending a lot of money. And so that one has turned into a battle. But I think that I would certainly say that, I don't predict, but I would say that Van Vranken is certainly a favorite to win that. In District 3, there are 2 districts that straddle the Mississippi River. One of them is majority black, the other was majority white. District 3 is a majority black district. It's got 11 candidates, all of them African American. And
Some of them you've
some
heard
of them,
of.
at least several of them very controversial. I mean, you've got Derek Shepard, a former state senator who was convicted of money laundering and conspiracy for doing some dirty deal with Bill Jefferson. And his campaign slogan is, "Do you believe in second chances?" And I'll tell you what, that guy does not sleep.
No.
He is seen as a real threat to make the runoff. When you got 11 people running, you could make the runoff with 16%. A former council member, help me out
Donald
here.
Jones.
Donald Jones.
And also Byron Lee.
And also Byron Lee.
So two
two
previous
former
holders
council members.
of this seat.
Yeah, and both of them are well-known names. And it's seen by most people that two out of those 3 will make the runoff. There will definitely be a runoff. And most people feel that Byron Lee sort of has a lock on a runoff spot, but you really don't know. And then there's Cedric Floyd, who's a controversial school board member who was just voted out, a guy who always, Hurricane Cedric is my name for him. He creates controversy and makes noise. Jedediah Jackson, who's a civil servant type guy, been in administrations for the last few years.
Got the Gambit endorsement, right?
Got the Gambit endorsement. He's not been accused of anything wrong yet. And then a host of other people who are known kind of in their neighborhood, but not known district-wide. So that is definitely going to go to a runoff, and who knows who can make it. And like I said, it could be very close, and you could have 2 people with 15, 16% of the vote making the runoff, which means, I'm fond of saying, to quote the late, great Jim Carvin, every election's a unique event. Even the runoff, as Kevin pointed out in one of his earlier questions in the governor's race, the runoff for governor will be a completely brand new race from the primary. That race in District 3 will be a brand new race in particular. District 2, you have, I think, 2 candidates, Michael O'Brien and Dino Bonanno. Dino was a longtime civil servant. He served for 30 years in parish government, held a number of different positions, nice guy. Michael O'Brien has actually run once or twice before in a different council district, and he's kind of found his stride this time. But I haven't seen any polls. I don't know. They both got some endorsements. I forget, one of them got the Alliance, the other one got the Chamber, so it's not like there's a phalanx of endorsements lined up behind either one of them. And then in District 1 is the Gretna-based West Bank District. I think it even goes down to Grand Isle, formerly held by Ricky Template, who was elected to one of the at-large seats without opposition. In the District 1 race, former Judge Marion Edwards was drafted to run when Chris Roberts got indicted. So, and I think Edwards is probably, just with the name Edwards in a district like that, should run pretty well.
Although, is he related to any of the other Edwards?
He's not related. If you're old enough, like if you're an AARP eligible guy like me, when Marion Edwards first ran for office, he was one of the top, I think he was the first assistant DA in Jefferson Parish. He ran for a district judgeship. And of course, he's got a name that is the same exact spelling of then governor, former governor Edwin Edwards' brother, Marion Edwards. And the commercial was him sitting up in a studio like this and somebody putting powder on him. And he starts off saying, "I'm Marion Edwards." And somebody walks in and says, "Aren't you the governor's brother?" "No, I'm not that guy." And he kept saying, "No, I'm not that guy." And Marion could pull it off because he's got this very humble, disarming demeanor.
Does, yeah.
And he's kind of a Wilford Brimley character and very likable. And so this time, Jimmy Lawson was running against him, but then he dropped out. But I'm told he was going to run a commercial saying, I know last time I ran and did a commercial, I'll tell you who I wasn't. Now I want to tell you who I am. Because since then, he's served like 30 years in various judicial capacities and retired from the judiciary, and now he's running for this. But
And is
then
he
there's the
related
council
at
at
all
large
to
race.
the current Governor Edwards? Is there
He's not related to him either.
to either? Okay.
No.
Just clearing that up.
Marion Edwards is actually from Monroe,
Okay.
or as they say up there, Monroe. Edwin Edwards is from Crowley, and John Bell is
From Amite.
is from Amite. So there are probably three different Edwards branches in Louisiana, at least. And then the at-large race, which is also an interesting race, has not gotten dirty, but you know they're both running hard. A veteran elected official, Paul Johnston, who is the incumbent from District 2, term limited, running at large. It's at large B. And Scott Walker, not the former governor of Wisconsin, but the local Scott Walker, former WDSU anchorman, is running. And you know, they're both running hard. I think Scott's got the chamber, Johnston has the alliance, and Johnston has more of the political support and more money. But I think, you know, it's one of those generational things. And if you look back historically at Jefferson Parish races, oftentimes voters in Jefferson Parish like a new face. And that's what Walker's got.
I mean, I look at Johnston and I think he is the type of candidate who loses a Jefferson Parish, right?
Yeah.
Elton Lagasse and
An old white guy.
You know, just a guy who's been around forever and, you know, maybe
Hasn't done anything wrong.
Hasn't done anything wrong. He's just kind of old, old new. One thing that would be interesting if Scott Walker is elected, he of course left WDSU. He runs a donut shop now in Jefferson Parish. But that would be 3 former television anchors in local office in this area: Jennifer Van Franken, Scott Walker, and then of course Helena Moreno over in New Orleans.
Right.
So career path. Those of us
I
in
am
journalism.
not running.
I'm not either. Yes.
I was going to ask about the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's race, but if you don't think that's worth asking about, because it got real chippy last time. It started off really chippy this time, and then it seems to have died down. Anything to say about
it's
it?
because only one of the candidates has any money.
Yeah.
And LaPinto doesn't feel like spending a whole lot of it, so he's done a couple of ads, and I don't even know if he's done any polling. But interesting, I was at Channel 4 earlier today, and they said they're doing a couple of stories about the sheriff's race, and LaPinto said, I'm not even coming in. This guy's not worth talking about.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, that's dangerous, you know, but we'll see.
That's kind of cocky, isn't it?
I don't.
Okay.
Well, LaPinto, and I like Joe, I think he's been a very good sheriff. He's not the best candidate. And I don't say that with any, you know, ugliness, it's just a fact. He, to this day, thinks he won that race because he did not attack his opponent. If you recall,
that's not why I
Johnny
think you're right.
Fortunato was going to win that race 55 or 56%. 13 nights before the election, in a live taped TV debate on WDSU, he said, there were 2 like lightning round questions, yes or no, and the first one was, should Mike Yenny have resigned because of the scandal? And LaPinto said yes, and Fortunato said no. And then the next question was, if Mike Yenny runs for re-election, will you support him? And Johnny Fortunato said yes. And at that moment, you could literally hear the air going out of the balloons for Johnny Fortunato. People literally took the signs off their lawns and threw them in the garbage can. But Joe LaPinto is convinced that the reason he won is because he didn't attack. He won because his opponent really screwed up and stepped in it.
I want to move on to some legislative races here, and we've got a question from Peter Athos, who asks, can they discuss this District 98 race? I'm confused by the 4,444 candidates, which is, they're not quite that many, but there are a lot of them, and a lot of them are pretty good and have pretty similar positions. Can you break that down?
Yes.
At least one is in the room, I will say.
Yeah. Stephanie, you go first on that.
That's my district, as
There
Peter
you go.
knows.
And you handle it.
We're neighbors. There are 7 candidates. It's, you know, you don't often see fields that are this good, this strong, and this, you know, especially such big fields. I think there are 4 candidates who really have significant support. You're seeing a lot of signs. You're getting a lot of mail. They're all Democrats. And it's interesting. I moderated a forum not that long ago, and not a lot of space between them on positions, very, very knowledgeable. In some cases, I would say, maybe more knowledgeable than some of the people running for governor about what state government does. But you have people, there's someone who, they would range from very liberal to kind of moderate liberal, I think. Really, everybody was against the abortion bill the governor signed. Everybody, had some good
Everybody's
ideas
for
for
minimum wage
infrastructure,
hikes and
minimum
all
wage
the things
hikes. Everybody thought charter schools had made, the state better. So I think you really just want to look at their resumes, and none of them have held public office, but they've all been involved in a lot of things, from charter schools to BGR, I know Amy's here, and the Police Foundation and neighborhood associations, and Emerge, the group that, that statewide is trying to elect more Democratic women, and or Ravi Sanchesetti is run in Lafayette, and, they've, a lot of, you have good choices, and I would say just really kind of look at their resumes and their styles and, get a sense of what you think would work best, because I think there are arguments for a bunch of them.
That, when we were talking about that race at Gambit, we all said it would be nice if we could take at least 5 of them and put them in other races so that they can,
because one of the things that's so interesting is that there are a lot of races that are not contested in, this area and across the state, where you don't get maybe not even 1 or 2 good people, let alone a bunch of good people. So this,
and you could say the same thing about District 91,
Yeah.
which is the neighboring district. 98 is Neil Abramson's district. He's term limited. 91 is a district from the Garden District, and further down this way is Walt Leger's district. He's also term limited. And you have, I think, 4 candidates in that race, and they're also very, very good candidates.
Or 4 that have put together
4 that
real
have really put
campaigns
together.
anyway.
4 or 5 total in the race.
Yeah, I mean, one more thing I'd say about District 98 is, I forgot what I was going to say now.
I'll chip in.
That happens to me
I
all
was
the
at that
time.
forum as well, and the 7 candidates were there, and Neil Abramson, whose district it was sitting in the audience. And one of the last questions was, what state lawmaker do you look up to?
That's what I was going to say.
And not a single one of them said Neil, and it was like, ooh.
And he was there, I will say,
Yeah.
He was sitting in the audience, and nobody named him. Most of them named Walt.
2 named Walt, 1 named J.P. Morrell, and then there was an Ed Murray, there was a Royce DePlessis, so yeah.
Yeah, so that was kind of rough. Did you
Yeah.
have anything more on District 91 that you wanted to add?
That's Walt Leger's district. There's a guy named Carling Dinkler who I think is running to kind of be the Walt Leger type. Walt Leger, of course, was the Speaker Pro Tem, very respected. This is a guy who's been involved in a lot of civic stuff and is very well known in the kind of, people who work around government community. Mandy I think gender dynamics are going to play a role in some of these, because there's been a lot of talk about how few women we have in the legislature, and especially when you have issues like the abortion one that really blew up this year. I think there is interest among some people in electing more women. There's a woman named Mandy Landry who's running a strong race. Is that a split district racially, I think?
It's
there
pretty
are black
close.
candidates.
I think
There's
it's
Robert
slight
McKnight
African-American majority.
Yeah. Who's the other?
But turnout-wise, it winds up being pretty close to 50-50.
Yeah. But again, good candidates. And
We had a question from Kat Huft here regarding turnout, wanting to know, are you expecting high turnout in the state for the primary, and which faction is most motivated to vote?
Well, again, looking at it from a statewide perspective, and the waters are pretty calm statewide, and that's good for incumbents. 52 out of 144 state legislative races have already been decided because of lack of opposition. Some of them had no opposition from the get-go. Some of them, like out in Kenner, you had 5 candidates qualifying, 4 of them dropped out. Debbie Villio was elected, but for whatever reason, 52, 40 in the House out of 105. That's like 38% of the seats in the House have already been decided, and they've been decided for about 4 weeks. In the Senate, you've got 12 seats out of 39. That's almost 31% already decided. Interesting little factoid, and I'll get back to the question. Pat Connick, who is has just been, he's one of those 12 in the Senate elected without opposition for John Ilario's seat. Pat Connick has now been elected to the legislature 4 times. He has never had an opponent. Never.
He's the brother of the
He
DA,
is the younger
obviously.
brother of DA Paul Connick, but
No
they
one
only
ever runs against
practiced
him
law
either.
together
Yeah.
for about 2 years, and Pat kind of broke away and did his own thing. And full disclosure, when I met Pat Connick when I was in law school, we were study partners. And when he first called me to tell me he was going to run for office, I said, Pat, you didn't raise your hand once in 4 years of night class at Loyola, nor did you didn't ask or answer a question in 4 years. How the hell are you going to go run for office? He says, well, just watch. And next thing you know, he gets in without opposition. And I figured the first one was on his brother. Since then, you know, his brother can't take credit for any of those. I don't know how that happens. It's either nobody over there cares about running for office or he's done such a job, but I've never heard of anybody running 4 times for the legislature, never having had an opponent. I mean, even Edwin Edwards, at his most popular, got opponents. But anyway, the waters are pretty calm, which is good for all incumbents, Democrats like John Bell Edwards as well as Republicans. But if you look in various pockets of the state, like Jefferson Parish, where we have a hot race for parish president, there are some pockets of hotly contested local races. I was talking to Pearson Cross, who's a very well-respected political scientist over at ULL, and he said very much so in various parts of the state. Some of the legislative races are very hotly contested, but none of the statewide races. So in terms of factions, I don't think it's a question of factions. I think it's more a question of different areas. You know, there's in St. Tammany, but there's a fairly hotly contested race for sheriff and a somewhat hotly contested race for parish president. When Dominic Impostata didn't get an opponent in the Kenner-based council district in Jefferson Parish, and it looked like Jennifer Van Vranken wasn't going to get a much of an opponent. She ultimately did. But imagine a low turnout in East Jefferson and not a real high turnout in St. Tammany. That's terrible for the Republicans. So these races that are we're seeing around
those
the
two
state,
districts,
those two,
because those are the
if
Republican
you're a
districts.
Republican
Yeah.
running statewide, you need a big turnout in East Jefferson and a big turnout in St. Tammany. If you don't get those two things, you're in trouble. I mean, unless your opponent is really easy to beat. So.
I think we could see something of an elevated turnout in Orleans, even though we don't have local races other than legislative races. We do have some hot legislative races, like we said. Stephanie Hilferty one is another seat, the J.P. Morrell one.
The only place where it's not going to be is the West Bank.
Yeah. But that's true, yes.
They're all mostly
because they were reelected.
Troy
Troy Carter and
Carter's
Gary
unopposed.
Carter.
Yeah, a lot of those races, legislative races.
But what we do have is a ballot question, a statewide ballot question, constitutional amendment number 4, that is about New Orleans, and it's about affordable housing. Basically, voters across the state have to vote on whether New Orleans should be able to give some property tax breaks to people to encourage affordable housing. And we don't know a lot of details about the plan because the mayor has not written the plan yet. We know some that are written into the constitutional amendment, but she really wants that, and she's got a political operation that has proven to be pretty potent since, you know, in her election and also in some tax measures subsequently.
And that's an issue that will turn out.
So so that will
people.
turn out some people, and she will be working to get people out, and those are going to be John Bell voters.
That's a John Bell Edwards vote. And when you look at the hotly contested legislative races in Orleans Parish, they are Central City, Uptown, Lakefront, East New Orleans, Lower 9, and Bywater. So all over the East Bank of New Orleans, there are some hotly contested legislative races. I think Royce Duplessis might be the only one. I mean, Karen Carter-Peterson has a race,
She's an
so she's going to
opponent,
be turning.
yeah.
So there's a reason for people in pretty much every neighborhood.
The Wesley Bishop seat, which
That's
is now
not
Jimmy
contested.
Harris, that's not
But
contested.
that overlaps with Hilferty and 99.
Yep.
I mean, 100, I'm sorry, Hilferty and 97.
So
So
those
you
are
got,
contested.
those are all contested. So and of course, John Bell Edwards is going to pour money into African-American voter turnout statewide because he gets 90% of that vote. So
Yeah.
that's simple numbers. The more that turn out, the better for
Right.
him.
I mean, the Stephanie Hilferty district is kind of interesting because that is, she's an incumbent Republican, moderate Republican. That district crosses the parish line, crosses the 17th Street Canal, Lakeview into Bucktown, and she beat the incumbent Nick LaRusso 4 years ago. And so she's a Republican, but she's one of those moderate Republicans that has been willing to work with the governor. So she has someone coming at her from the right and someone from the left. A guy named Kirk Williamson from the right who is running as, all in with Trump. And then you have a woman named Tammy Savoy, who you might remember ran against Steve Scalise last time, so she's a Democrat. So, then you have that weird open primary squeeze thing where if the people on either end are strong enough, they could squeeze out the person in the middle, and the person in the middle is an incumbent. So that's a really interesting one.
I live in that district. I don't think that's going to happen, but it's one of those things where people like us pay very close attention to a legislative race. I'm not sure that a lot of voters do, but and of course, signs don't vote, but Hilferty got out early with a lot of signs. But Williamson seems to have worked really hard.
Yeah.
A lot of mailers from
And
PACs.
he's claiming a Trump endorsement, which is interesting
Not really
because
a Trump endorsement.
he apparently met Trump when Trump was here for a fundraiser, and he said, "Hi, I'm running for legislature," and Trump said, "And I'm going to support you." And I'm quite sure the president did not know he was running against a Republican incumbent,
Yes.
but yet he's out there telling people he has the endorsement from the president of the United States. So.
I wanted to bring up some pitfalls that may come up for some of the candidates, and Denise Botcher asked a good question, but to preface it, I'm going to bring up the second gubernatorial debate where they asked in the lightning round, would you support rolling back Medicaid? And all three of the candidates said no, because they know it's a popular program. So that's obviously a pitfall for some Republicans. But as far as Democrats go, Denise wants to know, will the impeachment inquiry by the Democrats have any impact on the governor's election? Because I know there are people that are chomping at the bit to try to get Governor Edwards to state where he stands on impeachment.
He's not going to take a stance.
He is not going to do it.
And to me, the perfect answer for him is, well, wait a minute. Actually, one of the things I already said was, we have a congressman who's supposed to go up there and vote on it, but he's missed all the other votes running against me. And the other congressman, instead of asking me how I feel about Trump, why don't you ask them why they can't even take a position in the governor's race? But they're going to try to push him on that.
They are.
Look, the news cycles have been so crazy out of Washington. And just to go back to a question I was answering earlier, and I forgot as I was talking to mention this. One of the reasons why the waters are so calm in Louisiana, two reasons, actually. Edwards has not done a terrible job. The two main motivators in electoral politics are fear and anger. And the voters in Louisiana are not angry and they're not scared. Now, the Republicans in the Republican-leaning PACs are trying to scare them with things about criminal justice reform, et cetera, but by and large, the voters aren't buying that.
Right.
And the other thing that accounts for the calm waters is Washington, D.C. Louisiana historically has been the crazy, aunt or uncle in the attic nationally, but now we look like, we belong at the dinner table, and Washington D.C. politics is all crazy. And it just sucks the air out of all political rooms because it's all anybody wants to talk about. And Pearson Cross gave me a great quote. He said, like him or hate him, Trump puts on a show every day, and everybody tunes in to watch the show. And they get their fill of politics from that show, and then they want to put it on Jeopardy, and they're not paying attention to whatever else is going on. So that helps to calm the waters as well.
I think John Bel Edwards has this, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like, is this a national election or is it not? And, at this point, it really does not feel like a national election, and this is part of it. And, if it's not a national election, then who cares what he thinks about impeachment? Now, again, Ralph Abraham does have to worry about that because he's in Congress. But, back to what you were saying about calming the waters, how calm the waters are, I think it's so interesting. Ralph Abraham has this line that he clearly decided would be his line early on, and it is this: help is on the way. He says that. He said that at the end of the debate the other night. He says it in his ads. And here's the thing. I don't think people feel like, I think they wanted help 4 years ago. I don't know that I don't feel like that's where we are right now as a state.
I think there's and you touched on this earlier, Steph, and I totally agree with it. There are people out there who feel like the state's going to hell in a handbasket. They're probably about 25% of the electorate, 25, 28%. Ed Shervinack could probably give us an exact number. But they've already made up their minds. So when you run for governor, you got to make a pitch to at least 60 or 70% of the voters out there, because you're not going to get all of them, but you need to get 50% plus one. But when you focus your pitch on 25 to 28%, and there's somebody else out there with 20 times the money that you've got saying the same thing, that leaves a lot of other votes out there for somebody else to pick up.
And I don't get the sense that either Abraham or Risponi is even asking for the votes of anyone who is not in that camp.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a big mistake.
Okay. I'm going to wrap up here with 2 wild card questions that you don't know about. And one of them is, what the heck is Mitch Landrieu going to do next?
Oh, boy.
This is a really snitty answer, but who cares? No, I mean, I'm sure Mitch cares. I don't wish him any harm. I was a
Maybe
Mitch
Cheryl.
fan and a Mitch critic.
Yes.
But, he's had his time. I'm not going to say he's irrelevant, but he's not that relevant anymore because, and he would be perfectly okay with that. He's had his time. I think he would probably love for Uncle Joe to be the nominee because that's who he has supported early on and would hope to get maybe a cabinet job or an ambassadorship. I don't know.
It's interesting because he was really hot in national Democratic circles for a while. He's really not now, and I think that is not anything he did. I mean, people here would say, sewage and water board, sewage and water board. I don't think anybody out there cares about that. But the thing is, we just have all these other Democrats who are running, and I just think there's no oxygen left for anybody else. So when people are looking now saying, who could be a vice presidential candidate, who could be a cabinet secretary, I think you're looking at people like, the people who might not make the ticket, Pete Buttigieg or Julian Castro or Cory Booker. And again, there are so many characters out there. So him just kind of taking himself off the stage, I think it's going to be maybe a little tough for him to get back on.
I don't see him as a vice presidential candidate because what does he bring? And that's not a knock. It's just you got to bring something to the ticket. And just being pragmatic, what does he bring to either a Biden or a Warren?
Not a Biden, certainly, but a Warren. I wrote a column about this, and of course I heard sewage and water board, sewage and water board, sewage and water board, and that's not what it was about. And it was basically, when Biden started to maybe look like he was faltering some, I thought we needed, what the race needs is someone like Biden, but not Biden. Someone younger, someone who would take that moderate lane of, not Medicare for all, the more moderate policies and articulate them and sell them very well. And I thought somebody like Mitch could have done that. And I don't necessarily know who else in that field fills that role. Maybe Pete Buttigieg. I've read a story today about how that's what he's going for now. He's now positioning himself to be like the moderate guy. I think Amy Klobuchar could have. She doesn't seem to be catching on. And meanwhile, we have, especially a few months ago when it really looked like a lot of the field was going to be pulled to the left. And I'm going to focus specifically on Medicare for all because almost everybody was for Medicare for all, and then they kind of backed off. Except for Warren and Bernie Sanders. And I personally think that's a very dangerous position for Democrats to take because it really scares people when you talk about messing with their health care, and I think we have learned that. But so that I thought could have been a role for him, but I think maybe the time has passed.
Among the talents that Mitch Landrieu really has, besides he can sing, he's got a really good voice.
He can, yes.
But he really is a great speaker. If Joe Biden could speak like Mitch Landrieu, he'd be unstopable.
Mm-hmm. And if he were in his prime, like Mitch Landrieu is.
Well, I mean, if he had Mitch's presence on a stage, even at this age, he would be really good. Because look, Bernie's almost as old or even older, and he's pretty sharp on the stage.
He's very sharp,
So.
And
And
he
I'll
is a
give Clancy a
CNN
chance to ask
commentator,
just say one more time, who the hell cares?
Okay.
Bobby Jindal seems to disappear under the waves, and then every few months he'll pop up like a porpoise with an opinion piece or a tweet, and during this last presidential debate, he was on Twitter talking about all these people, and he had a piece in the Wall Street Journal and all that stuff. What's next for Bobby Jindal?
Well, the only reason he pops up at all is because the Wall Street Journal lets him write op-eds. If it weren't for that, I don't think he'd have much of a forum. And I don't know if it was Peter or somebody else, when he tweeted something, he said, because his handle was Governor Bobby Jindal, saying, please stop using governor, you embarrassed the office so badly. Was that you, Peter, or somebody? Yeah, great answer. But, you know, talk about a guy who's irrelevant. But I don't think Mitch is desperate. I don't think Mitch craves national relevance. I think he'd like to have it, but I think he could have a fine life, and I think he feels like he could have a fine life without it.
And remember,
but Bobby
he looked at it.
craves it. I mean, he's like a starving man. All these people are feasting, and what's the matter with me, kind of thing. You know?
And remember, Mitch, you know, Bobby went for it and Mitch didn't, which tells you something. And he, again, there were a lot of tweets back at him when he started commenting on the presidential race. Like, really, who are you to talk? You were, you know, spent your whole campaign on the kids' table, you know? What's so interesting to me about Bobby Jindal is, again, it's a Republican state. He was immensely popular. I mean, remember that? Remember how nobody ran against him when he ran for re-election? Nobody of any stature. They just gave it to him. And remember how even that first time he ran against Kathleen Blanco, that he was, you know, there were a lot of people in that race who had much more experience and were much better known publicly. He went right past them all. So the fall was really spectacular. And the thing that really kind of sticks with me is nobody in Louisiana wants his endorsement. Nobody wants, and again, you know, they want David Vitter. Even if they don't like him, they respect his acumen. I mean, he's still a presence.
At least want to get his advice.
Yeah, he's a presence in Louisiana politics still. Bobby Jindal is not. It's interesting, the last time I saw Bobby Jindal, it was at Kathleen Blanco's funeral, and he and Mitch Landrieu sat together. Maybe comparing notes, yeah.
Well, one other thing about Jindal, when he got elected and came in, he had an opportunity unlike any governor since Huey Long, because he got elected in the election of 2007, which is the year that term limits kicked in. 60% of the legislature turned over. And we have in Louisiana a strong governor form of government, and he literally could dictate to that legislature what he wanted, and he frittered away that opportunity. He could have been, if he had delivered on half of his promises for reform, but all he did was the window dressing. He didn't want to do the substantive stuff. And back in the day, I gave a talk to cable at one of its annual meetings, and I don't know where, sometimes these things just kind of pop out, but I said, he's the most risk-averse governor in my lifetime. And I went through back to John McKithen and Edwin Edwards and all these governors who were willing to risk their own political capital to get something done, something big done. Bobby Jindal has never risked his political capital and will never risk it. And the ultimate compliment, the Advocate called me up and said, what was that quote again? We want to use that. And they wrote it up. This is before long before the Picayune went to 3 days a week. So I made the Advocate way back then. But that's Jindal. He had no political courage. I'm going to clean it up. So.
Okay. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. I wanted to thank, again, AARP for being such a great sponsor for this event. Thank you, and thank you for saving me money over the years. I appreciate that. I want to thank the Advocate for the use of the space, and the Doll and Toy Fund. Pick up the flyers on your chairs. Come back and see us tomorrow night, $15, food and drink. Thank you to Clancy and Stephanie.
Thank you all.
And we appreciate you. I think they'll be around for a few minutes if you want to talk to them.